Okay. My name is Tanya Finchum. I'm here with Daisy Lawler, and this is part of the Oklahoma State University Library's project, oral history project called Women of the Oklahoma Legislature, Past and Present.
Can we go back?
Huh?
All right, Lawler.
Lawler.
Okay.
Okay. Lawler.
L-E-R. No Y in it. Okay.
And she was in the House, or she was in the Senate from it's all wrong, from 2003 through 2006. Elected in 2002.
Right.
Okay. So
we're actually sworn in 2002, unlike the state people that are sworn in this month.
Okay. And then you actually start working
then
sometime in November.
In November. We actually start in November.
Okay. So 2002, 4 years basically.
Yes.
Then. Okay. Okay, we're going to start off with bring us up to date a little bit. Tell us about your youth, your hometown, what your childhood was like, parents, that type of thing.
My parents were dairy farmers. They were actually always were self-employed in the farm. They worked really hard. Neither of my parents were very educated people. My mother probably had an eighth grade education, and my father probably had a third, if that much. So they never had a job outside of agriculture. They always worked on the farm, and then they acquired some land. In fact, the first house, they were very hardworking people. The first house that they owned, that they lived in, they didn't like the way it was. And so they elected to tear it down all except for one room, and they lived in that one room. And then they resawed all the boards, and they took a hammer and they straightened all the nails, and they reused all of the things that they had torn apart, put the house back together, and the house is still standing to this day, and people are still living in it. It would be just like a 3-bedroom home. And so when they saw a need, they didn't hire somebody to come in and do the job. They did it themselves. And then they sold that farm, and then they bought some more land, and they decided they'd like to go into the dairy business. And so they needed to build a dairy barn. And so, as I said, they did everything themselves. They acquired a manual cement block maker, and so they made the cement blocks 2 at a time until they had enough to build a dairy barn, which is probably 100 feet long by maybe 40 feet wide. They did the plumbing, the electrical work, the cement work, everything that needed to be done, they did it themselves. And so then they had a dairy farm. Later, as I grew up, I was an only child, and mother decided I needed companionship and to go to school. So at 5 years of age, she took me to first grade and dropped me off. Mm-hmm. And I'm not sure the teacher was real happy with a 5-year-old being in the classroom, but I was there, and that was it. There were no kindergartens at that time, so you just began in first grade. So I went through school a little younger than some, and but always it was fine. I enjoyed school, and enjoyed being with the people. But as I said, I did not participate in sports because we lived on a farm, and my family had the job of milking in the morning and the evening, and taking me to sports activities would just be burdensome. So I never participated in that. I did some other activities, but not that. Had a wonderful teacher in high school, a speech teacher. She was always afraid that I would be late when we went to speech contest. So she invited me to come spend the night with her. And I thought that was the utmost of anything that I'd done in a long time, because I got to stay all night with my teacher in this wonderful house. And just being a country girl, this was just really special to me. And so she was always one of my favorite teachers, because of the interest that she took in me as a farm girl. We never had much money. In fact, there were times that when we'd have like a school play, and we would walk At that time, I went to Warwick to school. And elementary school was apart from the high school. And you had to walk maybe 8 blocks to get from one school to the other to attend some of the activities. And sometimes they would have high school plays, and maybe they would be a dime. Well, a lot of times didn't have the dime to go because we just didn't have a lot of money. So I grew up in a time that we were poor, but there were a lot of people that were poor, and we really didn't, dwell on that. We had everything we needed when we grew up. And as I said, my parents worked hard. And then they valued education, even though they didn't have a lot. And when I told them I'd like to go to college, and at that time you either got married or you went to college. And so I decided I'd go to college, and I went to Chickasha and began there. And I had a really good time. Didn't make good grades, but I had a good time that first year. And then I got married, and my husband had a degree, and he was an agriculture teacher. And we moved up northern Oklahoma and lived there a few years. And I decided I had 2 children, a boy and a girl, and I decided I wanted to go back to college. And so we moved back south, and we were in agriculture. We had a farm. And I drove to Cameron and would put my children on the bus to go to school in the mornings. This was after they were at school age. And then I would drive to Cameron and go to school. And by the time it's time for them to come home, I would drive back home to be there when they got home. So I arranged my classes like I would take all 3-hour classes one semester and all 2-hour the next, so that I could have days off and also acquire my education. And so I finished in 3 years, and I got a degree to teach elementary education. I finished in December, and then I got a job in January, and I began teaching first grade. I taught first grade at Empire, which is a school close by, a rural school, probably about 400 or 500 children, and I taught there for 20 years. I taught in the same classroom for 18 years, first grade, and I taught pre-first a couple of years, and then I moved to another classroom and taught 5th and 6th for 1 year. And then after that, I decided it was time for me to change schools, so I went into Duncan and taught there the last 8 years, first grade. And so I retired after 28 years of teaching, and mainly 25 of it was in first grade, and I loved it. I loved every day, and I would always wish for someone to have a job that they liked. And I liked going to work, and I liked teaching, and I liked the children. And so, but I knew it was time for me to retire after 28 years. So then I had been interested in politics. And my husband had ran for an office, and he had been a senator from 90 to 94. And my friends knew that I was interested in politics. I'd had been involved in different races over a period of time. And so when I decided I was going to retire, some of them asked me if I'd run for this office. And so I did.
Tell me a little bit about your campaign.
My campaign, I ran against an incumbent in my first term.
Male or female?
It was a female of the opposite party. And being a school teacher, it was a time in 2002 that things were very bad in the state. They were having a lot of cuts and lack of money for education in other areas. And I decided that through encouraging my friends that this was something that I would think about and pray about. And so I thought about it and prayed about it and decided if this was what I was supposed to do, then I would know that. And through asking and receiving, I realized that this is what I was supposed to do. And I had some friends that I asked them if they would help me because I knew I didn't have very much money. I was, first of all, a retired school teacher, which is not a lot. And my husband and I farm and ranch, which is not a lot. And so I knew I was running against incumbent, which you can't raise very many dollars if you're running against a sitting incumbent. So I knew it would be an uphill battle, but I could win. And so with the help of my friends and a lot of door knocking and grassroots campaign, that's how I ran my campaign. I was told at the time when I first started that if I didn't have $100,000 to $150,000, that I probably needed to stay home and that I probably couldn't be successful. Well, I knew I didn't have that. And so, in fact, the amount I did raise was about $24,000, and then I had some money of my own that I put in, about the same amount. And so my campaign was around $42,000, $45,000 that I ran on that first time.
That's great. What was your motto?
My motto was Pick Daisy. When I retired, I had a retirement party from teaching, and I had a newspaper came in and they covered it, and they knew I was thinking about this. And at that point, that kind of came out, and I had my daughter-in-law and other people had been talking, and they thought that would be, since my name was Daisy, they thought that would be a really good slogan.
It is, and it worked.
It worked. It really did.
Did you have a role model, one in particular that you looked to guide you along this political path?
No, I didn't. Not particularly. I really didn't.
Once you got into the Senate, did you have someone that kind of took you under their wing? And
when I was running, actually nobody thought I could win that was like in the Oklahoma City area, except for Senator Keith Leftwich. After he ran his race, he had an opponent that year, and he had finished in the primary, and he came and said he would like to help me. And so he gave me some advice along the way. And so that actually was someone that helped me in my first campaign. The people just in the Senate, I think, the different ones that had been there for several years, Cal Hobson had some really good information, and he's very, very wise and intelligent as far as telling you or advising you, maybe with some points that you need to be aware of.
Do you remember what some of your thoughts were your very first day?
The very first day, it was very exciting. My family were there. We took a lot of pictures. Were sworn in. Of course, there's a lot of media attention at that time, and you just I think all the 4 years when I would drive to the Capitol, you're always in awe of that building. When you drive down Lincoln Boulevard and see that building, thinking, I have an office there. It's just always been maybe a blessing, to be able to serve the people.
Do you have any major goals when you were going in? What issues you were campaigning?
Yes, there were several issues that I had campaigned on. One was education, funding education first. Another one was roads and bridges. We have on the highway. I live on a highway in Stevens County, and there were several very narrow bridges there that were obsolete, that were built in the 20s and 30s, and they were very dangerous. And that was one of my goals, to get more funding for roads and bridges, to work on the high cost of medication, to help senior citizens in funding nutrition sites and things like that. That was another area that I wanted to work in. As I approached it, I got maybe you get put in certain areas when you get put in committees, and the prison system seemed to be an area that I was very interested in. When I got elected in November, I had a call from a friend that actually lived in Stevens County, and she worked in what now is Mabel Bassett. And she asked me to come to their graduation and give the speech at the women's graduation at a Mabel Bassett. And in December, after I was elected in November. And so I'm thinking, oh, okay. So I went there, and it was really a very eye-opener. The women that graduated were getting their GEDs. They were getting certificates of completion as far as a career tech completion, I guess you call it. Anyway, they were so excited. You were thinking they were getting their master's or doctorate. Their families were there. They were excited. And it was just a really awesome, touching time. And then I was able to tour the system. At that time, it was a private system. And then within the year, the state took it over and moved more women in there, and it went from like 300 women to about 1,000. And I went back and visited later, as it was a state system, and it was more crowded. They had taken out one of the career tech programs. They were down to one, and it was very I was very disappointed in what had happened during that year's time when the state had taken it over. And so my goal began, I guess, to put more career tech programs into the prison system, to enable these women to have some type of job skill when they were released. Many of them did not have much education. So that was another goal, to get a good reading program into the system. And that was one of my bills about the first year that I was there, to try to implement a phonics reading program in all the prisons. However, I was only able to get it into one. At Alva, the warden there was a little more progressive, maybe I might say, than some of the others, and she accepted the challenge to take it into the system and did the testing, and it proved to be a very good program. So that is, and even until the fourth year I was there, I had a bill to allow them to do a faith-based pods in two of the systems as a pilot program, and then to follow that and see if it would improve the recidivism, and also to allow them to, if they had a valid driver's license when they came into the program, into the prison system, then they would be able, through monetary, for them paying for it, to keep that driver's license valid if they were in less than 20 years. So when they were released after serving their term, they would have some form of identification and be able to drive a car and get a job. And right now, that is not something that is allowed, and they have no identification. They cannot cash a check. They cannot drive a car, most of them, because they have no driver's license. They've been in too long and it's expired. So those were some of my goals, to reduce recidivism in the prison. So somehow I got into a little bit of that while I was in there.
Were you chair of any other committees?
I was chair of agriculture. First year I went in, I was chair of select agencies, which is several agencies that are self-funded, and it gives you a chance to educate yourself as far as how to run a committee. Then I served as chair of that 2 years, and then the third year I was chair of agriculture, and vice chair of the subcommittee on education, and vice chair of the subcommittee on aerospace and communications.
Had women ever held those?
I don't think a woman had ever been chair of agriculture before. Traditionally, that is a man's position. And I think I was the first woman chair of agriculture. When I was elected, I was the only woman on that committee of about 20 members for 2 years. The third year, another woman came on the committee, and then I was put as the chairperson. And it was a really good fit for me, because agriculture and education were the two areas that I was probably most interested in. And I was able to pass several bills during that time and head off bills that were not good for agriculture, or see that they were amended so that they would be good for agriculture. So it was a good fit for me.
Did you have a particular leadership style since you were the lone woman for a while in that particular committee?
I think my leadership style was maybe all business. And I run maybe a fast committee. There's not a lot of side talk. I like for my committees to be perhaps everyone needs to say what they need to say, but we don't need a lot of extra side talk. So it's pretty fast moving committee.
And what was your major accomplishment?
In agriculture, I believe we were able to, or going to be able to, build a new laboratory right here by the agriculture building. For years, the laboratory had been on the third floor of the agriculture building here in the city. That's where they do all the testing, a lot of the testing of the foods, the water, feed, and it was an open atrium type building, and it was not meant to be a laboratory. And you have a laboratory on top of people that are doing typing and business type down below, and it was just not safe. And it had grown to the point that even the electrical outlets were not so that they would carry the current, and there were burn marks on it. You had tanks of explosive type materials, if they were exposed to heat, sitting over in the wall, beside the wall. The fire escape pattern was not good. It was just a disaster waiting to happen. And so I was able to pass a bill to be able to build a new one, and they should be turning the dirt sometime this spring out beside the old one. And so that was, I believe, one of the major things. And expand the diagnostic lab at OSU also.
Okay. I had read somewhere you were involved with some hospice issues.
Yes, probably about the first year that I was up here, I had the opportunity to author a hospice bill. I had a friend in Duncan that was very, very involved in hospice, beginning some of the first hospice care in Stevens County. And so I called her and said, they want to build a freestanding hospice house. Is that good? And she said, yes, I think so. So we traveled to Wichita Falls, which had one, and toured that one and saw that this is a really good thing for people that cannot stay at home. They do not want to stay in a nursing home. Of course, they can't stay in a hospital most of the time. So in the last weeks of their lives, they would be able to go into this hospice house and stay there. They would have a nice room. Their family would be able to come in. It's looks like kind of assisted living building on the outside, and all the equipment's kind of hid in the room so that you don't see any of that, a lot of that equipment as far as the oxygen and things like that. It just comes from plugins in the wall. So it was a really nice thing, and I think at this point right now, Oklahoma City's planning to build one, and that may be one of the first in the state.
Great, that's very good. Can you describe some of the culture, the social culture of the legislature? Did you go out to dinner or hang with the boys or hang with the girls or anything in particular?
Yes, I lived up here because it was almost 2 hours from my home. So I would come up on Mondays and stay till Thursday and drive back home and just live in a hotel while I was up here. And that worked out fine. I chose not to try to buy anything or get an apartment because I did not want to have to bring all the things up that you'd need for that. So because of the evening events, staying up here was much better because sometimes I would be at the office before 8, and I would get back at the hotel probably sometimes 8 or 9 o'clock at night. And
Okay.
so you have those events, and sometimes early in the session you have maybe 3 or 4 in one evening. So you would go from one to the next, to the next, to the next, trying to make an appearance. People have gone to the trouble to have these events, and invited you. So you like to go make at least an appearance in most of them, and show courtesy to the people that are putting the events on. And so there are a lot of things to go to, dinners that you're invited to. There's the ability to gain a lot of weight while you're here, and hopefully you not overindulge in that area to put on a lot of pounds.
Did you have time to make friends with some of the other women, either in the House or the Senate?
Mainly, the Senate mixes with the Senate, and the House mixes with the House most of the time. There are some joint meetings, and there are some times in the evening that all the women get together, that some of the lobbyists or other, we have particularly had another senator would invite the women out, just the women out to have dinner. Because there's so few of us in the Senate, I believe there were like 8 women. Most of the time, 6 Democrats and 2 Republicans. In the House, there were somewhere ranged from probably 11 to 14 women in the House out of the 101. In the Senate, out of the 48, you have that few of women. So there's not a whole lot of women. In fact, one senator asked me when I was first elected if I wanted to be treated differently or like one of the boys. And I replied, I said, I know you respect each other as senators. And so, yes, just treat me as one of the boys, because I know you respect each other and you would respect me.
That's a good answer. And he responded?
And he just grinned.
Did you notice if there was a difference in attire? I mean, like previously, before you were elected, and then when you started to serve, did you feel like you had to alter what you wore in order to fit in with the...
Well, there were a lot, of course, wearing a lot of suits. You're expected to wear, I think, of course, the men have to wear suits or sport jackets and slacks. They don't go on the floor unless they have a tie and a suit or sport jacket. That is, there is a dress code. When I would go talk to sometimes young people in schools, I said, most of you have a dress code at school. Well, we had a dress code at the Capitol. We were expected to wear suits or dresses. Most of the time I chose to wear some type of suit, because in the chamber it's cool. The temperature is set for men's suits. And so unless I wore something with the long sleeves, I would get cold. So I always chose to buy suits and wear some type of suit in the chamber, and I enjoyed dressing up. And of course, you wear high heels or moderately high heels all day long, and when you're going from 8 to 8, by the end of the day, it gets a little bit tiring, but it was good.
How about your office? Did you have to share it with anyone?
In the Senate side, we have. The first year I had an office to myself, but also I shared the common area of the secretaries. There were Senator LeBlanc was on one side for a time, and Senator Gum was on one side for a time until they kind of moved out. The first 2 years. And I was up on 5th floor. Really, really nice big office. I had Senator Shedrick's desk. I had Senator Shedrick's chair. I had Senator Taylor's desk, and I had Senator Henry's parking spot. I said, what more could you want? So that was, I always had a really nice office. And then I chose to move down on the 4th floor the 3rd year because of the stairs. going up and down the stairs in high heels is sometimes gets kind of old. And so I moved down, and I had that office for 2 years. Down on 4th floor was a separate office, and I really enjoyed it. It was a nice office.
Do you anticipate staying in touch with your secretary, your assistant, whatever?
Yes, I visit with my secretary, and in fact, today after I leave here, I'm going to have lunch with her and another senator, lady senator. So I want to stay in touch, but probably not be at the Capitol that much.
What are your plans to do now that you're no longer in office? Or do you want? You don't have to say if you don't know.
I had a goal before I was elected. I thought I would like to do some writing. I have been doing some research and some interviewing, and I want to perhaps write. We'll see, maybe a book. My mother had some mental health problems, and I'd like to do some mental health work and maybe write some of that in a book.
Well, would you have any advice for women who are thinking about going into politics?
I think if you are determined that you want to go into politics, you need to know that campaigning is hard work. It's expensive, but if you have the determination and the goal, and you're willing to get out and work really hard, it is very attainable. And you need to have family support, because it takes a lot of time away from your family. You miss a lot of things. I believe if you do your job like you're supposed to do, you miss some things with your family that you might ordinarily do if you were home. And it depends on whether you live around Oklahoma City or further away like I did, whether you have to stay up here. And if you want to attend the events, it takes a lot of evening time, even if you're in your closer, because you're invited to a lot of chamber events, just a lot of things people invite you to. And I always felt pretty obligated to go to those. I wanted to go to those to be with the people in my district and to be accessible to people that might want to come up and tell you something. And even at church or in the grocery store, people come up and they'll say, I know probably this is not the place, but, and then they go ahead. I always say, this is great, And so I think that's one that they should know ahead of time, that it's going to take time away from their family, especially if they have small children. It's going to take some time away from that. And that for the spouse, for them to know that they need to be involved. They're invited to a lot of events up here. They can come, and to always, I think, come and try to be involved as much as they can be. I know some of them have jobs or small children, but try to stay involved and communicate with your spouse.
Do you have any special memories from the campaign that stick out in your mind? Special stories or funny ones or sad ones?
Oh, I can't really think of anything right now as far as funny. I just know that people were always really good to jump in and help and do things. And you'd ask them to do endorsements. And of course, that's just putting your name on the line for someone else. And I was always very fortunate in having people that would come in and help me. And I know a lot of times people don't distinguish between Congress and state offices. And sometimes, they'll think that you've been in Washington, D.C., and actually, you haven't. And it's kind of hard to start explaining, I don't go to Washington. I go to Oklahoma City, And so people get confused about that sometimes.
Okay. When history is written about you, is there anything particular you want to be remembered?
I think most of all, I would like to be remembered as somebody that worked really hard to serve the people, that was always had an open door, and that tried to put forth legislation that would help the citizens of Oklahoma. My legislation, I was always tried to be very careful what I carried and what I voted for as far as legislation, because there were a few bills that I wish I probably had not voted for. And overall, most of them I'm okay with, what I had done. But there were 2 or 3 that, looking back, there were mistakes in the bills, and I didn't catch those. As you know, they go through committee after committee after committee, and they go through lawyers, and people look at these, and you would think there wouldn't be any errors or mistakes or things you wish weren't in the bill, or something that would hurt someone a group that maybe you wouldn't want it to be detrimental to. And there were a couple of those bills that came back like that wish we could have done over. But that's the hardest thing in the world to get done, is to try to correct a mistake in a bill. No author likes to admit that they made a mistake, and they don't want their legislation bothered with. And so it's really hard to try to redo something that's been done. I hate to say that, but it's true. And so that probably, overall, I would want people to know that I had worked really hard to serve the people, and that my constituents, when they had problems, that I wanted to help them solve their problems. I always wanted to be a problem solver, and I was sometimes upset that I couldn't always solve the problem that they had and make things, because I know when they come to me, a lot of times it would be because they were at their wits' end, and it would be red tape or government interference or things that they just couldn't get anybody to help them with. Sometimes they didn't have the financial means. And so I would always like to be able, if I could, to help them solve their problems.
Were most of your constituents rural then, or a mix?
It was a mix. My district ran from Stevens County, which is south of Comanche, all the way to South Oklahoma City. Moore and South Oklahoma cities in my district have Tuttle, the eastern area of Tuttle, and Newcastle. So I have had a mix in my district.
Well, we've talked about what it was like the first day on the job. What was it like the last day on the job?
Oh, the last day, as far as the last day in session, or the last day before I was unelected?
How about both?
The last day of the session, you're always excited and ready to go home. You're glad things are wrapped up. Of course, this year we had a special session again. It seems like we had several special sessions when I was there. And you hope that you get the things finished, but sometimes things come across that are not like you want to vote on them. And people, it sounds good. The sound bite sounds good. We need to do this. And special interests are pushing for this typical thing to get done. But there are things in the bill that would hurt your citizens. Things that overall, in the long run, that would not be good for everyone. And so you sometimes go in special session to get a bill that would be workable for and better and fair for everyone. And so we went into special session a couple of times to get those bills done. And so the last day of session, you're always excited about going home. You're tired. Of course, living up here, you're ready to move out and to go home and to be with your family. And of course, this year the campaign was starting. And so it was time for me to go home and start getting my signs out and getting all those up and start walking. And so that's what I did. And so I campaigned from June until November and walked the streets, walked door to door, and did a lot of door to door walking. At the end, it was on election day. It was sad because I lost. I lost by 495 votes out of 24,000, I guess it was. So I knew it was going to be close because of the sheer makeup of my district. Mm-hmm. I have a lot. It's a pretty even break between Republican and Democrat in my district, and the Moore area is growing significantly, and probably 3-1 in that area are Republican, and I'm a Democrat, and so I knew it would be close, and so when it came down to it, I'd only won by 87 votes the first time when I won, and so it was sad. I lost. It was a day that it was my granddaughter's birthday. She turned 16 that day, and she had gone to play a scrimmage basketball, and she came back and she had hurt her leg, and so then it was really a really very, very bad, no good day.
Well, that's a special memory you can save with her. So.
Yes, and then she ended up having to have surgery. So anyway, she will remember that probably forever.
Do you think any of your relatives then will aspire to go into politics then, based on your experience?
I don't know. I really don't know whether any of them have that desire or not. My husband had the desire to start with, and I was not. It was not something that I was really excited about when he first started saying that he wanted to run. The first time he mentioned it, our children were small, and I said, there's no way. Those people up there are all just crooks. We're not going to do this. I had a bad experience with politicians. My parents, I had told you earlier, that were dairy farmers, and they lived in an area that flooded. And so the people in the town south of them that flooded decided they wanted to build a dam, a lake. And so it just happened that the lake would be their farm would be right in the south end of the lake, right where the dam was. And so they were going to through eminent domain, take all of their land. And so at that time, I think where it was born that was governor or who, but I was not happy with those people. And so that gave me a really bad, perception of politicians so there was no way that I wanted that my husband to be a politician. And so time went on, and our children graduated from high school and college, and he came back again, and he at that time, and then about the 90s, he said he wanted to run. And so I said, oh, okay, I'll help you. And so then that's when we began. So then after he was elected, I realized that, no, these people weren't bad people. They were just people like me and everybody else in the citizenry, people that had a desire to serve and that were running, and they served their district. Maybe the issues that were important to them were different from what was important to me, and maybe they were more conservative or liberal than I. But that was because they were representing their district, and that was the makeup of their district, and that's what they needed to be.
Since you've helped with your own campaign and then his, was there a difference in how they were run? I mean, you learned from him, I'm sure, but...
Probably so. Mine was probably more of a woman's campaign. Upon campaigning, I decided that I wanted to be sure that since my husband had been in politics, I wanted to run on my name, not on his name. So I ran on my first name and not my last name. So a lot of even the posters and things would have just my first name on it and my last name real small. So that I wanted to be distinguished from him. And I had a lot of women. I find that a lot of college students and high school students and women will volunteer and actually get out and walk the streets and work more so than men. Men will give money in that area, and maybe have a reception or so. But women will actually do the door knocking and the walking and keeping your office and the volunteering more so in that area.
That's interesting. And knowing and having experienced that, did you feel more obligated to push for women's issues once you were in Congress?
No. I just, whatever issue was out there was what I felt obligated or wanted to push forth. If it was agriculture, when I was the chair of agriculture, it was agriculture issues and working in that particular area. When I sat on the education committee, it was education issues. There were some issues I would have liked to have gotten passed that I pushed. Financial literacy was one of the bills that I pushed for a couple of years, didn't get passed. Sometimes it's real hard to get issues passed in education because of resistance to change. I find that people don't like to change. Some of the senators and representatives think that you're trying to push an unfunded mandate, even though it seems to be common sense that young people need to know how to handle their money because of the financial credit card burdens that they end up with the bankruptcies in Oklahoma being one of the top in bankruptcies and top in credit card debt, and one of the top in divorce. And all of those work with lack of knowledge on how to handle your finances. And my issue was, if you have some financial knowledge, that if you're educated, then you will, we will find a way that through education that we will lower perhaps the bankruptcies, the credit card debt, and the divorces.
Related, do you think?
Absolutely. They find that about 60% of divorces are because of arguments over finances.
Interesting. Did you do your own research for your bills, or did you have staff that helped?
Oh, we have staff that help, and I would always save articles too. I'm still throwing away, and it's a gradual thing of, well, I might need this, and I still do some speeches. So I'm a saver. That comes from being a school teacher. You save everything just in case one day you might need it, even though the staff at the Capitol could have brought it up in just, a short while. So they did a lot of the research. You can go to National NCSL, the National Legislature, and they have things you can get online, information. And so there's a lot of sources of information, and I had the opportunity to travel to several meetings throughout the United States while I was in session, education, and at first human resources, that type of thing, DHS, those type of issues the first 2 years, and then the last 2 years more education and agriculture meetings that I had opportunity to go to and visit with legislators from throughout the United States and talk about issues that were what was going on in their state.
Have I forgotten to ask anything in the budget? We've covered quite a bit.
I don't know. You might look on your list and see.
Well, we've covered everything on my question. I was going to ask you to describe a typical day.
When I would go to especially talk to young people in September, we have legislators go out in the classroom, and my favorite was always the 8th graders. They are interested. They will ask questions, and they're just in an age that I really liked. And I would always take one of my calendars with me, and let them see what a day would be like. And as I told you, I started typically around 7:30, 8 in the morning, and sometime ended 8 or 9. And I would have a monthly calendar, a weekly calendar, a monthly calendar, and then I would have a daily calendar. And my assistant would print out would be like a postcard size index card, my daily calendar. And it would have the time, the room, and who I would be with at that time. And so I would take that color, and it would always be a different color, so I could keep up with it, like a blue card. And I would have that card with me all day, because sometimes it was an hour increment, sometimes it was 30 minutes, sometimes I would have several places to go in the evening at almost the same time, and I need an address, and sometimes I have to print off maps if I was not familiar with the site that I would drive to. I would mostly go by myself because some of the other ladies lived in different senators lived in different areas of the town, or lived here in the city, and so it would just be easier for me just to drive and meet, or to go to whatever area I needed to. And I always tried to be very careful as a woman in the legislature that I would always go meet someone at a restaurant, and so there would not be any doubt about what was going on.
Did you keep all of these cards, all of these blue cards?
Oh, no. They always went in normally the trash that day. I did keep the calendars because for the yearly, if anybody asked, taxes, that for my transportation and this, that, and the other. But I did keep the yearly calendars.
That's something we might be interested in having a copy of.
Okay.
And just because it does tell what you did, over the course of the day. Think about it.
I will. I can do that. It may be scribbled on, but that'll be all right.
That's all right. And
okay.
That's the way things were done.
Okay. I'll just gather up some of those things like that. And
so that person was very important to you then, the one that made out your daily card?
Oh, yes. Libby was my assistant, and she was with me for 4 years. She was very good with the people, and that's when I hired her. We were able to hire our own secretary, and she had worked for other senators, men, before me. And so I was kind of a different person. In fact, I think one time she asked me, do you sleep at night? Or when I would come in, I'd say, oh, I've got this idea. I know what I want to do. This is something I want to do. I had implemented a junior senator program where if first graders would read in the second semester, if they read 25 books, I would give them all a certificate of reading achievement. And if they would go ahead and read in the summer another 25 books, then I bought T-shirts and had them made up that said junior senators on it, and had a seal, Oklahoma seal on it. And I would take to them in the fall when they were in second grade. But their parents would send me a letter and say, my son or daughter has read 25 books this summer, and give the size and all. And so we would do that. And if in the newspaper I saw someone that had a 50th anniversary or more, I always liked to send them some kind of citation and just little things like that I thought were important for people, to give them recognition. And if there's something really special, in my district that went on, I needed to bring attention to that. And we had the governor recognized people for being heroes a couple of times in my district, things that they had done to save lives. So I always wanted to do things like that. And of course, that involved more work for her, anything that I took on. And the staff was always good to work with. They were always good to help me when I had ideas, legislation I wanted to put forth. I had probably over 30 bills passed during the 4 years that I was in the Senate. And they were the range from the hospice that we talked about. Sometimes they were insurance, and that was a hard one to get passed. And sometimes it just seemed like common sense things to me, that why it wasn't already in law. And I'd have constituents have problems. This last session, we had someone a young lady that had witnessed a crime, and she was the only witness. And they put her name in the media, and she was a college student, and her family were horrified that this person knew who she was, where she lived, and they were afraid for her safety. And so they asked us to pass some kind of legislation that would keep their name as a witness out of the media. And so last session we did. I had a representative that represented that district, and I passed legislation to give them the same protection as a witness as the victim. And so
seems common sense, doesn't it?
It seems common sense. Another common sense one I had was, I think about the first year, I had a person that had his insurance. He had they put vision and something else on his insurance, and he had not asked for it. And so I got passed that in order to add additional things to your insurance policy, you had to sign off for it, which just seemed like common sense. Mm-hmm. And so we got that passed. Another area that I was very interested in was annexation. And I talked to you about the eminent domain. I had some people in an area in south in my district that were being annexed into town. It was strip annexation. And we were able to get that passed, which they hadn't been able to get anything like that passed for some time. They'd been working on it, and we changed the little strip annexation and expanded it so the area agriculture people love that bill. And this past year we worked on eminent domain. Didn't get it passed, but we did get a trespassing law passed that they'd been working on. And so I was able to pass some legislation in that area to help.
I haven't passed 30. That sounds pretty good. I have no idea if that's...
Well, I think my predecessor passed 4 in 8 years.
That's excellent.
So, but I was blessed, I think, coming in during term limit time, when before people stayed in for a long time and there were not term limits. So with people terming out, they knew leadership was going to change, and you couldn't sit back and just watch for several years or a term. You had to jump in. And I believe that's the reason they started implementing chairmanships right at the beginning, to give you a chance to get acquainted with the system. And there's nothing like practice and experience to teach you how to do things and to give you experience. The first bill I got, I was the first freshman to get a bill passed on the floor of during my term. And they always have kind of initiation for the first freshman that gets his first bill passed. And it was, I thought, well, I'm going to do a really easy one. And it was getting the reading program into Alva Prison. And it was a pilot program, and it didn't cost anything. The prison warden agreed to it, and it was, not something that people were against. I mean, it was just like a win-win thing. You're teaching people to read in prison so they can get out and get a job. And so I thought, oh, this is an easy one. I'll do it first. So I did this and got it up there and looked up, expecting all green lights, looked up, and everything was red. I thought, oh my goodness, and looked around, and then they just died laughing, and then they all pushed the green button. But it was just kind of an initiation type thing that you do to put a person in shock, when their first bill, when they're already nervous and apprehensive, because it's hard to get up on the floor and to speak and to debate a bill. And I think it's a little different sometimes for women to get up and debate a bill than men. Sometimes you have the sense that there are certain people that would like to make you look bad on the floor. And then sometimes you have if two women debate each other, there's a different feeling amongst maybe the men than if two men are debating each other. So being a woman, it is a little different. I believe you have to work harder. You bring a different perspective, as far as you bring a perspective of a wife, a mother, a grandmother, into some of the issues. Perhaps women look a little differently at the legislation, more detailed, perhaps, and sometimes do more homework because of the questions. And when you get on the floor, you never know what's going to be asked, never. And so hopefully you're ready for whatever question that comes up, but sometimes you're not. And those are hard times.
When you're not, what do you do? You don't have...
Well, sometimes you say, I'll find that answer and get back to you. Mm-hmm. Sometimes you just say, I don't know. I haven't thought about that, but I'll find that. Or sometimes if you see your bill's in trouble, you say, well, I want to lay this bill over and come back to it later after I find the answer. Sometimes if you know that you're in trouble, you'll pull the bill, and then you'll go to those people that are against the bill and try to see what the problems were, and with the bill, you can amend it or allow amendments on the floor to try to get your bill passed. And sometimes that bill is just going to die because of who is against it. And I know when I did my driver's license bill that I told you about earlier, it just had too much in that bill. I had loaded it up with different things, and I think if it had been a little bit cleaner and just maybe one subject, one thing, that it might have got passed, or just separated. Sometimes you just separate them out. I had one bill, the insurance bill, that was just half a page, clean bill. Went to the House, came back 19 pages, and had 4 different things in it you just send them to committee and clean it up and bring it back and take out what you don't want and leave in what you do want. And that way sometimes they get passed. So it's really a long process. I had a tort reform bill. They laughingly called it the McDonald bill. And what it did was just say that if you ate 10 McDonald's burgers a day and got really heavy, that you couldn't sue the company because it was your choice. And the food industry would like to have that passed. And it was, in itself, was a good bill. But because of the title on it and the fact that if you got it on the floor, it could be amended to be a huge bill. And so when I passed it through committee, Judiciary Committee, it went from probably about 12 pages to 120 because it became the tort reform bill. And my little bill was right at the end of it, the last few pages. And it never got passed because of the magnitude of the bill.
It's amazing how the whole system works, isn't it?
It is amazing, but it's a good system. There are things that I would have liked to got passed that didn't, that I thought was just common sense and would be good for the general public. But for some reason, it did not get passed because, as I said, not everyone agrees with you when you're there, and to see things like you do, because there were some special interest against it. But sometimes timing is important. The first year I was there, I was interested in drug court. At that time, I was trying to get some fees put in to drug court so we could expand the drug court system. At that time, there were not very many, and I thought the drug court system was a very good system and that it would keep people out of prison. It would give them a second chance. People had made bad choices, and it would allow them to still either go to school or to keep their jobs and try to be rehabilitated. But in my bill, I also had education for judges. If they had not been acquainted with drug court, either presided or had some acquaintance, knowledge of drug court, that they would take a 2-hour course on drug court. Well, I learned real quick, you don't tell judges what to do. That was something, we have enough lawyers in the system. There's about 20 to 25% of the Senate that are lawyers. And there were no way that they were going to tell judges what to do. So that bill did not pass. However, upon failing, one of the other senators picked up the bill, put it in his bill, eliminated the part about judges, but kept all the rest. And that part of it did, so it did pass without my name on it, but the bill did pass. And as a result, since then, drug courts have become, not my bill, but drug courts have been real popular and have expanded over the last few years. And a perception is almost fact sometime. They perceived drug court to be soft on crime, and no legislature wants to look like they're soft on crime, even though it was being smart on crime. And as a result, over the years, I think the Oklahoman got on the bandwagon and started saying this is a good thing. And that turned some people's minds to thinking, oh, yes. And it was proven. They did some research, and it showed that it did help and reduce recidivism. It is a good thing. And so as a result, drug courts have expanded throughout Oklahoma.
So you never know what one little piece is going to do. That's good.
And it is. Mm-hmm. And as I said, timing. People have, maybe 2 years ago would not have thought something would work or was good. And then 2 years later, because of sometimes media, exposure, and research, people have decided, and education of the general public, so that they don't perceive it as being soft on crime. And no legislature, when you're getting out to run for an office, wants to be tagged that way.
You have to learn these little secrets as you go, too, I guess.
Oh, yes. And that's part of the system.
I can't think of anything else. Anything else? No?
I can't think of anything else.
Well, thank you so much for sharing your story.
Will I get a copy? Can I get a copy of this?
We will.
Okay.